The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, was created in 1970 during the Nixon administration to deal with emerging environmental problems caused by excessive pollution from industrialization, transportation methods, and unchecked hazardous chemical applications. The original goal was to stem the escalating negative impact on human health and the natural environment. By creating an agency that encompasses federal research, environmental monitoring, standard rules and regulations, and enforcement under one umbrella, Congress hoped to encourage, and force when necessary, individuals and businesses to take a more mindful approach to how we balance growth and progress with responsible stewardship. Some of the EPA laws set benchmarks to protect water resources, while others establish rules banning the use of certain chemical compounds for commercial use that could cause long-term or permanent damage to soil or irreversible health problems to humans and animals. Some of the laws on the books today restrict the type of building materials and what type of buildings or structures can be built in certain areas. Let's explore a few rules that directly impact real estate development and sales activities. First, we'll talk about the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, CERCLA. Also known as the Superfund, CERCLA became law in 1980. Many of the EPA regulations seek to encourage the development and use of benign chemicals to control weeds and insects, disinfection of our living spaces, and treat building materials to enhance strength and durability. The Act provides funding to remediate hazardous chemicals. CERCLA established a fund to clean up uncontrolled hazardous waste at sites identified by the EPA as priorities in need of immediate attention. Special taxes collected from the oil and gas industry funneled $1.6 billion into the fund in the first 6 years after ratification. While CERCLA's primary objective was to immediately remove any threat, the rules also included guidelines to minimize and prevent pollution threats and stabilize the environment by targeting sites with listed hazardous materials and any known contaminants, with the exception of oil and gas, which fall under other federal standards. The EPA standards attempt to reinforce personal accountability, and the agency has authority to sanction responsible parties who fail to remediate contamination problems. For example, people who transport substances on the National Priorities List and both past and present site owners may face financial and other consequences if they fail to voluntarily clean up the mess. If a responsible party fails to take action, the EPA is authorized to initiate removal actions using Superfund resources. Some regulations overlap with CERCLA. However, before we go forward with that discussion, let's back up just a minute. Did you catch that part about personal responsibility that says current and past owners may have liability under EPA standards? As a real estate broker or agent, you have a responsibility to help prospective buyers research the history of a building site and both occupied and unoccupied industrial/manufacturing facilities. Lawful and unlawful commercial activity prior to 1970 may have allowed now banned chemicals to be stored underground or dumped as wastewater near or in rivers and streams, polluting the water supply directly or indirectly through soil absorption. Environmental protection legislation doesn't just govern irresponsible use and disposal of man-made chemical solutions. Did you know that radon, a naturally occurring gas, is the second leading cause of cancer in our country? It appears in groundwater and air as a byproduct during the breakdown of uranium. Some building materials, such as exotic granites, cement, basaltic rock, pumice, and gypsum waste, also emit radon. The EPA updated their radon exposure prevention guidelines in 2013 to recommend everyone who purchases a home test for radon as soon as possible after occupancy. Additionally, the agency suggests people building new homes ask their contractor to utilize radon-resistant materials and subfoundation construction techniques to mitigate radon transfer from the air, private wells, and surrounding soil. Now, let's talk about the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, SARA, of 1986. The EPA spent the first 6 years learning on the job, so to speak. SARA reinforced the initial objectives and made changes based on knowledge gained. For example, SARA strengthened the focus on human health problems associated with hazardous waste sites and encouraged the public to get involved with the decision-making processes behind initiating best practices for cleaning up dirty sites. The Act provided new enforcement authority while giving states more involvement in standards development. SARA also requires that all remedies and legislation consider existing state and federal environmental rules and laws. Perhaps the most significant change was an increase in funding that brought the total Superfund trust to $8.5 billion. As mentioned earlier, some EPA legislation overlaps with other regulations. As an example, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, provides protocol and rules for underground storage tanks containing petroleum-based products, non-hazardous waste, medical waste, and toxic waste. However, CERCLA provides guidelines for the types of controlled waste. The two legislative initiatives enjoy shared jurisdiction. The Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and other environmental rules often intersect with independent EPA regulations, as well as both state and federal laws. Earlier, we mentioned radon gas, which is found in water sources and private wells in almost every region of the United States. Ideally, all commercial and residential property water supplies would be tested for radon before transferring ownership. This doesn't always happen, though, so the EPA has numerous regulations enacted to protect public health and wellness. One example is the Safe Drinking Water Act, SDWA, approved by Congress in 1974, which established safety standards for public drinking water. The law has seen two amendments, one in 1986 and another in 1996. While SDWA rules cover water sources, including lakes, rivers, springs, streams, and underground wells, the EPA does not monitor or otherwise regulate private or commercial wells that serve fewer than 25 people. The standards aim to control, eliminate, or mitigate both man-made and naturally occurring contaminants. There is an ongoing partnership between the EPA, state regulators, and a variety of water systems to ensure health-based standards are upheld across the United States. Recognizing the vast number of threats to safe drinking water for humans and animals, SDWA initially focused on monitoring and improving water quality at the tap, or faucet. However, the 1996 amendment addressed threats from improper chemical disposal, pesticides, and waste injected underground with a broader approach. The modifications enhanced existing law by creating an overarching policy to ensure safer water from the source to the tap. This meant that new guidelines laid the foundation for eliminating barriers to modernizing water systems, providing advanced operator training, access funding opportunities, expanding public information campaigns, and implementing innovative source water treatments. This fundamental change made it more efficient to address environmental contaminants from animal waste, chemical disposal, underground substance storage leaks, human threats, and other potential and known hazards to a clean water supply. Two other EPA regulations are the Clean Water Act, CWA, and the Clean Air Act, CAA. Some people confuse the SDWA with the CWA. While SDWA governs clean water from the original water source to a consumable beverage, CWA primarily regulates source water. Think bodies of water like the Great Lakes, rivers like the mighty Mississippi, and reservoirs created by man-made dams and levees. CWA covers ponds and navigable waters and sets standards for sewer treatment plants and surface waters. The Clean Water Act came about as a major restructuring of the 1948 Federal Water Pollution Control Act, FWPC. Exhaustive amendments created a funding source for the construction of sewage treatment plants and established EPA authority to implement a permit program for discharging any pollutant into navigable waters from a point source. Further amendments in 1987 eliminated construction grants while establishing regulations that solidified state-federal relationships, such as the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which empowered states to proactively manage water quality within their borders. Environmental protection laws and clean water regulations aim to protect humans, animals, and aquatic life with short-term and long-term solutions to prevent contamination from irresponsible human activity and natural occurring hazards. Finally, let's briefly discuss the Clean Air Act, CAA, enacted in 1970. Prior to 1970, there were few regulations governing air-polluting emissions from buildings, cars, trains, airplanes, and other stationary and mobile sources. CAA gave the EPA authority to establish nationwide standards to regulate hazardous air pollutants and to direct states to implement plans to appropriately mitigate air pollution by monitoring industrial activity and creating standards to reduce risks to public health and wellness. Amendments in 1977 and 1990 revised achievement goals because many states could not meet the rigorous requirements by the original 1975 deadlines. Environmental protection regulations and air quality laws govern residential wood-burning stoves, hydronic heaters, and forced air furnaces used primarily for heat. Some states enacted more stringent laws than the EPA. For example, in 2016, passed ordinances that prohibit new construction buildings from installing any wood-burning appliance, even one approved by the EPA, are air-friendly. Every state has unique environmental protection regulations. As a real estate professional, it is your job to make sure you know about local, state, and federal laws that regulate air and water quality. And you should take the time to dig into the history of each building or piece of land you plan to list. A well-informed real estate agent becomes a proactive advocate for every client.